back to Storytime with Miss Kay. Now, if you remember last time, Mrs. Twit played a nasty trick on Mr. Twit with a glass eye. Today we're going to find out about the frog in the bed. To pay her back for the glass eye in his tea, Mr. Twit decided he would put a frog in Mrs. Twit's bed. He caught a big one down by the pond and carried it back secretly in a box. That night, when Mrs. Twit was in the bathroom getting ready for bed, Mr. Twit slipped the frog between her sheets in the bed. Then he got into his own bed and waited for the fun to begin. Mrs. Twit came back and climbed into her bed and put out the light. She lay there in the dark, scratching her tummy. Her tummy was itching. Dirty old ladies like her always have itchy tummies. Then all at once, she felt something cold and slimy crawling over her feet. She screamed, "Ah!" "What's the matter with you?" Mr. Twit said. "Help!" screamed Mrs. Twit, bouncing about. "There's something in my bed!" "Oh, I'll bet it's that giant skillywiggler I saw on the floor just now," Mr. Twit said. That's what, screamed Mrs. Twit. "I tried to kill it, but it got away," Mr. Twit said. "It's got teeth like screwdrivers." "Help!" screamed Mrs. Twit. "Save me! It's all over my feet!" "It'll bite off your toes," said Mr. Twit. There's the picture of her screaming. Mrs. Twit fainted. Mr. Twit got out of bed and fetched a jug of cold water, and he poured the water over Mrs. Twit's head to revive her. The frog crawled up from under the sheets to get near the water. It started jumping about on the pillows. Frogs love water. This one was having a good time. And there you can see Mrs. Twit, who fainted, and the frog having a good time in the water. When Mrs. Twit came to, the frog had just jumped onto her face. This is not a nice thing to happen to anyone at bed at night. She screamed again. "Ah! There's a frog on my face!" "By golly, it is a giant skillywiggler," Mr. Twit said. "It'll bite off your nose." Mrs. Twit leapt out of bed and flew downstairs and slept on the sofa that night, and the frog went to sleep on her pillow. Ooh, Mr. and Mrs. Twit aren't very nice people, are they? They keep playing tricks on each other. Well, now I'm going to tell you about another trick they played on each other, and it's got worms in spaghetti. Okay, the next day, to pay Mr. Twit back for the frog trick, Mrs. Twit sneaked out into the garden and dug up some worms. She chose big, long ones and put them in a tin and carried the tin back to the house under her apron so he couldn't see. At 1 o'clock, she cooked spaghetti for lunch, and she mixed the worms in with the spaghetti, but only on her husband's plate. The worms didn't show because everything was covered with tomato sauce and sprinkled with cheese. "Hey, my spaghetti's moving," cried Mr. Twit, poking around with his fork. And here you can see them eating their spaghetti, and Mr. Twit doesn't know he's got worms in his plate. "Oh, it's a new kind," Mrs. Twit said, taking a mouthful from her own plate, which of course had no worms. "It's called squiggly spaghetti. It's delicious. Eat it up while it's nice and hot." Mr. Twit started eating, twisting the long tomato-covered strings around his fork and shoveling them into his mouth. Soon there was tomato sauce all over his hairy chin. "It's not as good as the ordinary kind," he said, talking with his mouth full. "It's too squishy." I find it very tasty, said Mrs. Twit. She was watching him from the other end of the table. It gave her great pleasure to watch him eating worms. I find it rather bitter, Mr. Twit said. It's got a distinctly bitter flavour. Buy the other kind next time. And there you can see Mr. Twit enjoying the spaghetti, wiping his face on the tablecloth because he's very dirty. But he still doesn't know that he's been eating worms. Mrs. Twit waited until Mr. Twit had eaten the whole plateful. Then she said, Do you want to know why your spaghetti was squishy? Mr. Twit wiped the tomato sauce from his beard with the tablecloth. Why? He said. And do you want to know why your spaghetti had a nasty bitter taste? Why? He said. Because it was worms! Cried Mrs. Twit, clapping her hands and stomping her feet on the floor and rocking with horrible laughter. And there we can see Mrs. Twit laughing at Mr. Twit for eating the worms. Gosh, they are very nasty people, aren't they? Okay, this is the end of our story time today. Next time we're going to find out about the walking stick trick. Goodbye.